Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Horizon, staring at the message that had just arrived. The words glowed on the screen like a threat carved in digital stone. His hands gripped the edge of his command chair as he read it again, hoping somehow the meaning would change. "We have taken your colony ship Endeavor. Send one representative to negotiate, or all 50,000 humans aboard will experience the Great Fear before they die." The message came from the Vorthak Empire. Jake had heard stories about them during his years in space. Every species in known space whispered their name with terror. They were called the Fear Bringers, aliens who could reach into your mind and fill it with such pure horror that most beings simply died from shock. "Captain," said Lieutenant Lisa Campbell from her station near the back of the bridge. "I volunteer to go." Jake turned to look at her. Lisa was young, maybe 30 years old, with short brown hair and calm green eyes. She worked as the ship's expert on alien minds and behavior. She had studied every known species and their psychology. But studying the Vorthak and facing them were two very different things. "Lisa, you know what they do to people," Jake said quietly. "The reports from other species all say the same thing. The Vorthak project feared directly into your brain. Most beings die within minutes of exposure." "I know, sir, but I also know we can't abandon 50,000 colonists. Those people left Earth to start new lives. They have families, children, dreams. Someone has to try to save them." Commander Rick Hayes, Jake's second in command, stepped forward. "Captain, maybe we should consider a military response. We have weapons, shields." Lisa shook her head. "Commander, the Vorthak don't fight with weapons. They don't need to. Every species that has tried to fight them has been paralyzed by fear before the first shot was fired. Their ships just sit there while entire fleets freeze up and drift in space." Jake looked around his bridge. His crew was good, experienced, but he could see the worry in their eyes. Everyone knew the stories about the Vorthak. Entire planets had surrendered without firing a single shot. Space stations had been abandoned when the Fearbringers simply announced they were coming. "Why do you think you can succeed where others have failed?" Jake asked Lisa. She was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I'm not sure I can, Captain. But humans are different from other species in some ways. We've survived things that should have killed us. We've lived through ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters. Maybe that experience taught us something about fear." The view screen showed the massive shape of the Vorthak dreadnought in the distance. It was unlike any ship Jake had ever seen. Instead of metal and clean lines, it looked almost alive. The hull was covered in spines that pulsed with strange light. Parts of it seemed to breathe like a sleeping animal. "Sir," called out Ensign Ben Rogers from the communications station. "We're receiving another message from the Vorthak ship." Put it on screen. The face that appeared was nightmare fuel. The Vorthak looked like something that should live in the deepest parts of an ocean. Multiple eyes glowed like burning coals. Tentacles moved around a mouth full of sharp teeth. When it spoke, the voice sounded like metal being scraped against stone. "Humans, you have 1 hour to send your representative. After that, we begin the fear protocol on your colonists. They will experience every possible terror their minds can imagine, and then we will show them worse things. Choose quickly." The screen went dark. Lisa stood up from her station. "Captain, permission to prepare for departure." Jake wanted to say no. He wanted to order the ship to turn around and flee. But 50,000 lives hung in the balance. He nodded slowly. "Granted, but you're not going alone. Commander Hayes will escort you to their ship." "Sir?" The Vorthak message said one representative only. "Then Rick stays with the shuttle. You go in alone, but at least you'll have backup nearby." Lisa nodded and headed for the door. As she reached it, Jake called out to her, "Lisa, come back alive." "That's an order," she smiled. "I'll do my best, Captain." An hour later, Lisa sat in the shuttle next to Commander Hayes as they flew toward the alien dreadnought. Her heart was beating fast, but not from fear. It was excitement mixed with determination. She had spent years studying how different species thought and felt. This would be the ultimate test of her knowledge. "You sure about this?" Rick asked as they got closer to the enemy ship. "No," Lisa admitted, "but being sure is overrated. Sometimes you just have to do what needs doing." The Vorthak ship grew larger and larger until it filled their entire view. Up close, Lisa could see that the spines on the hull were moving slightly, like the quills of some giant creature. Patterns of light moved across the surface in waves. The whole thing looked more like a living being than a spaceship. A docking bay opened in the side of the ship. It looked like a mouth opening to swallow them. Rick piloted the shuttle inside and they heard the bay doors close behind them with a sound like bones cracking. "This is it," Lisa said, checking her uniform one last time. "Wish me luck." "You don't need luck," Rick replied. "You need a miracle." Lisa stepped out of the shuttle into the alien ship. The air smelled like ozone and something else, something that made her stomach feel tight. The walls around her pulsed with the same light patterns she had seen outside. But worse, they showed moving pictures of creatures cowering in terror. She saw beings from dozens of different species, all frozen in expressions of absolute horror. 2 Vorthak guards appeared to escort her. They moved without making sound, gliding across the floor like ghosts. Their multiple eyes never stopped watching her, looking for signs of the fear that should already be gripping her mind. They walked through corridors that seemed to breathe. The walls moved in and out slowly, like the inside of some vast lung. Lisa forced herself to keep walking, to keep her breathing steady and her face calm. Finally, they reached a large chamber. The ceiling stretched up so high it disappeared into darkness. And there, in the center of the room, waited the creature from the view screen. But this time Lisa was standing right in front of it. This time, there was nowhere to run. The creature before Lisa was even more terrifying in person. Zarthok, the Vorthak prime interrogator, stood nearly 3 meters tall. Her skin looked like wet leather, dark and glistening. 6 arms ended in hands that had too many fingers, each one tipped with a claw that could tear through metal. But it was her eyes that were the worst part. She had 12 of them, arranged in 2 rows across her elongated head, and they all glowed like hot coals in a fire. "So," Zarthok said, her voice like grinding glass, "the humans send me a small female. Do they think I will show mercy to something so weak and fragile?" Lisa stood straight and looked directly at the alien leader. "They sent their best negotiator. I'm here to discuss the release of our colonists." Zarthok's tentacles writhed around her mouth as she made a sound that might have been laughter. "There will be no negotiation, human. There will only be your fear, and then your surrender. Your species will learn what all others have learned. The Vorthak are your masters now." The chamber began to change around them. The walls grew darker, and shadows moved in ways that made no sense. The temperature dropped so quickly that Lisa could see her breath. But something strange was happening. Instead of the terror that should have been crushing her mind, Lisa felt herself becoming calmer. "Let me show you the truth of existence," Zarthok hissed, raising her multiple arms. "Let me show you what waits for all living things." The psychic assault began like a hammer blow to Lisa's consciousness. Visions flooded her mind with perfect clarity. She saw the death of stars, suns growing old and cold, their light fading to nothing. She saw galaxies spinning apart as the universe expanded, leaving everything alone in the dark. She saw the heat death of everything, when even the last black holes would evaporate and nothing would remain but empty space. The images were meant to drive her insane with despair. She was supposed to fall to her knees, screaming about the meaninglessness of it all, but Lisa just stood there, breathing steadily, her hands clasped behind her back. Back on the shuttle, Commander Hayes watched his instruments with growing amazement. Lisa's heart rate was actually slowing down. Her stress hormone levels were dropping instead of spiking. Her brain waves showed the patterns of someone becoming more relaxed, not more afraid. "This doesn't make sense," he whispered into his communicator. "Captain, you need to see these readings. On the horizon." Captain Morrison looked at the data streaming in from Lisa's biometric sensors. Dr. Amy Clark, the ship's medical officer, stood beside him with a confused expression on her face. "Captain, this is impossible," she said. "Every other species shows extreme panic responses when exposed to Vorthak fear projection. Lisa's body is reacting like she's meditating." Inside the alien chamber, Zarthok was growing frustrated. She increased the intensity of her mental attack, showing Lisa visions of Earth burning. She made her see her family and friends dying in horrible ways, their faces twisted with agony as they called out for help that would never come. Lisa watched these visions with the same calm expression. When Zarthok showed her humanity being wiped from the universe as if they had never existed, Lisa actually nodded slightly, as if she was considering an interesting philosophical point. "You are broken," Zarthok snarled. "No creature can resist the great fear. It is impossible." "The visions are very detailed," Lisa said in a conversational tone. "You must have a lot of experience with cosmic horror, but you're missing something important about humans." Zarthok called for assistance. 3 more Vorthak appeared, each one a specialist in breaking different types of minds. Together, they focused their combined power on Lisa. The assault was so intense that it had once driven an entire planet to mass suicide rather than face the terror. They showed her abandonment, the crushing loneliness of being the only thinking thing left alive in a dead universe. They projected the fear of being forgotten, of having lived and died without anyone remembering her name. They made her experience the horror of watching everything she cared about crumble to dust while she remained powerless to stop it. Lisa closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, there was something in her expression that made even the Vorthak step back slightly. It wasn't defiance or anger. It was something they had never encountered before. "The thing is," Lisa said, her voice still calm and steady, "humans have been dealing with existential dread since we first looked up at the night sky and realized how big the universe is. We've been thinking about death, meaninglessness, and cosmic insignificance for thousands of years." She walked closer to the towering aliens, who found themselves backing away despite being the predators in this situation. "You show me the heat death of the universe, and I think about how amazing it is that we exist at all during this brief moment between the Big Bang and entropy. You show me how alone we are in space, and I remember that being alone taught us to treasure the connections we do have. You try to convince me that nothing matters, and I realize how freeing it is to create our own meaning." Zarthok's eyes blazed brighter with confusion and rage. "Impossible! All species fear the void. All creatures cling to existence and meaning." "Oh, we do cling to existence," Lisa replied, "but not because we think we're cosmically important. We cling to it because we know how rare and temporary it is. We matter because we choose to matter, not because the universe tells us we do." The Vorthak exchanged glances, their confidence shaken. Their entire civilization was built on the assumption that all evolved beings shared the same deep fears. They had conquered dozens of species by exploiting the universal terror of meaninglessness and death. But humans seemed to have developed something unprecedented. They had looked into the abyss and somehow found it beautiful. Zarthok made one final attempt. She reached deeper into Lisa's mind than she had ever reached into anyone's consciousness. She found the deepest, most primal fear that existed in all thinking beings and brought it to the surface with crushing force. The fear of never having existed at all, not just dying, but being erased so completely that there was no trace left behind. The ultimate void. For a moment, Lisa was quiet. Zarthok thought she had finally succeeded. Then Lisa looked up with what might have been pity in her green eyes. "You're trying so hard to make me afraid of not mattering," she said softly. "But you don't understand something basic about humans. We've always known we don't matter on a cosmic scale." The words that came next would haunt every Vorthak in the chamber for the rest of their lives. "We decided to matter anyway." The words hit the Vorthak like a physical blow. Zarthok staggered backward, her multiple eyes wide with something that looked almost like fear. In 3,000 years of conquering species across the galaxy, she had never encountered a being who remained completely unaffected by the great fear. "What did you say?" Zarthok whispered, her voice smaller than before. "I said we decided to matter anyway," Lisa repeated, taking another step closer to the alien leader. "You seem confused by this. Let me explain." The other Vorthak in the chamber looked at each other with growing unease. Their psychic abilities were supposed to work on all thinking creatures. Fear was universal. Terror was the foundation of survival instinct. Every species they had ever encountered shared the same basic dread of death and meaninglessness. Your species conquers others by showing them how small and insignificant they are in the face of cosmic indifference, Lisa continued. You project visions of universal entropy, of the heat death of everything, of the ultimate meaninglessness of existence. And it works because most species discover these truths for the first time when you show them. Lisa walked slowly around the chamber, examining the holographic displays that showed cowering members of various alien species. Each one was frozen in an expression of absolute terror, their minds broken by the revelation that their lives had no cosmic significance. "But humans figured this out a long time ago," she said. "We have philosophers who spent their entire lives thinking about the absurdity of existence. We have scientists who study black holes and the expansion of the universe and the eventual heat death of everything. We know exactly how small we are." Zarthok's tentacles writhed in agitation. "Then how do you function? How do you build civilizations? How do you find the will to continue existing? That's the interesting part, Lisa replied. We don't function despite knowing these things. We function because we know them. Understanding our cosmic insignificance freed us from needing cosmic significance. We create our own meaning. She stopped in front of a hologram showing a species that looked like giant insects. They were curled up in terror, their minds broken by visions of universal entropy. These beings probably lived their whole lives believing they were important to the universe, Lisa said. When you showed them the truth, it destroyed them. But humans grew up with that truth. We were raised on it. Back on the horizon, Dr. Amy Clark was studying the psychological profiles of various human cultures throughout history. What she was discovering made her hand shake as she typed her report. Captain, she called to Morrison, I'm finding something incredible in our historical databases. Humans have been wrestling with existential dread for millennia. Every major philosophy, every religion, every work of art, they all deal with the fundamental questions of meaning and mortality. Captain Morrison looked at the data scrolling across her screen. What are you saying, Doctor? I'm saying that what the Vorthak use as a weapon, humans use as inspiration. We've been immunized against existential horror by thousands of years of thinking about it voluntarily. Inside the alien ship, Lisa was explaining human culture to increasingly bewildered Vorthak. We have stories about the end of the world, she said. We call them apocalyptic fiction and we read them for fun. We have songs about death and loss and the passage of time, and they make us feel better, not worse. We have entire branches of philosophy dedicated to finding meaning in a meaningless universe. This is impossible, one of the other Vorthak said. No species can adapt to existential terror. It goes against every survival instinct. That's where you're wrong, Lisa replied. Humans didn't adapt to existential terror by overcoming it. We adapted by incorporating it into our daily lives. We carry the knowledge of our own mortality and cosmic insignificance like tools in a toolbox. She gestured to the chamber around them. You try to break people by showing them that their lives are brief and their achievements will be forgotten. But humans have been writing poetry about exactly those themes for thousands of years. We find beauty in temporary things. Zarthok was beginning to understand something that terrified her more than any cosmic horror ever could. You mean to tell me that your species has been voluntarily contemplating the very fears we use to control others? Not just contemplating, Lisa said with a slight smile. Celebrating. We have holidays where we remember our dead. We have art forms dedicated to exploring the tragedy of existence. We have entire genres of music about heartbreak and loss. The Vorthak leader felt something she had never experienced before. It was the cold touch of genuine fear. Not the artificial terror she projected onto others, but the real thing, the fear of encountering something utterly beyond her understanding. But why? Zarthok asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would any species willingly embrace such thoughts? Because we discovered something that you apparently never did, Lisa replied. We learned that acknowledging the darkness doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong. When you accept that life is temporary, every moment becomes precious. When you accept that the universe doesn't care about you, every act of caring becomes meaningful. She walked closer to Zarthok, who found herself unable to move. For the first time in her existence, the Vorthak leader was experiencing what it felt like to be psychologically dominated by another being. We have writers who spent their lives describing the meaninglessness of existence, and their books are considered treasures. We have musicians who sing about death and loss, and their songs bring people comfort. We have philosophers who argue that life is absurd and suffering is inevitable, and we built statues to honor them. Lisa's voice grew softer, but somehow more intense. You use cosmic horror as a weapon because you've never learned to live with it. But humans have been living with cosmic horror since we first realized we were going to die. We've had thousands of years to figure out how to transform terror into wisdom. The chamber fell silent except for the sound of the Vorthak's heavy breathing. These creatures who had spent millennia inspiring fear in others were now experiencing it themselves, and they had no framework for dealing with it. There's something else you should know, Lisa said, her green eyes reflecting the alien lighting. The reason I'm not afraid of your visions isn't because I'm brave. It's because I'm already afraid. I've been afraid every day of my life. Zarthok's multiple eyes focused on her with desperate intensity. Then why do you function? Why do you continue? Lisa's reply sent ice through every Vorthak in the chamber. Because being afraid doesn't mean you have to stop moving forward. Fear is just another emotion like happiness or sadness. You feel it, you acknowledge it, and then you decide what to do next. The human had just revealed the most terrifying truth of all. Her species hadn't conquered fear. They had made friends with it. Zarthok's breathing became labored as she tried to process what Lisa had just told her. The idea that a species could coexist with existential terror, instead of being destroyed by it, went against everything the Vorthak understood about psychology and survival. "Explain this to me," Zarthok demanded, her voice shaking slightly. "How can your species function while carrying such knowledge? How do you build civilizations when you know they will fall? How do you love when you know everything ends in death?" Lisa walked over to one of the chamber's strange organic walls and touched it gently. The surface pulsed under her hand like living flesh. "Because we learned something important about temporary things. They're more beautiful because they don't last forever." She turned back to face the assembled Vorthak, all of whom were watching her with an intensity that bordered on desperation. "Let me tell you about a human poet named Emily Dickinson," Lisa said. She spent most of her life thinking about death. She wrote hundreds of poems about mortality, about the moment when life ends, about what comes after. Her work is considered some of the most beautiful writing our species has ever produced. "Your species celebrates death?" one of the other Vorthak asked, confusion evident in his clicking voice. "We celebrate the fact that we're alive despite knowing we'll die," Lisa corrected. "We celebrate every day we get to exist in defiance of entropy. We celebrate love that persists even though it will end. We celebrate achievements that will be forgotten because the act of achieving them makes us human." Lisa began pacing around the chamber as she spoke, her voice growing stronger with each word. "We have scientists who spend their entire lives studying the expansion of the universe, knowing that their work proves how insignificant we are in the cosmic scale. But they do it anyway, because the pursuit of knowledge is meaningful to them. They don't need the universe to validate their curiosity." Zarthok tried once more to project fear into Lisa's mind, but this time it was different. Instead of cosmic horror, she tried to show Lisa personal fears: the death of loved ones, the failure of dreams, the slow decay of aging, the loneliness of being misunderstood. Lisa received these visions with the same calm acceptance as before, but now she began to explain each one. "You show me the death of people I love," she said, "and I think about how grateful I am to have loved them at all. The pain of loss is just love with nowhere to go. It hurts, but it's also proof that something beautiful happened." She gestured to the vision of failed dreams that Zarthok was projecting. "You show me failure, and I remember that humans have a saying, 'It is better to have tried and failed than never to have tried at all.' We value the attempt as much as the success." The Vorthak leader was becoming increasingly agitated. Her tentacles lashed through the air as she realized that every weapon in her psychological arsenal was useless against this human. "But surely you fear pain," Zarthok said desperately. "Surely you fear suffering." "Of course we do," Lisa replied. "But we also know that suffering is often the price of meaning. We have people who choose difficult careers helping others, knowing it will cause them pain. We have parents who worry about their children every day because love makes you vulnerable. We have artists who pour their hearts into work that might never be appreciated, because creating something beautiful matters more than being comfortable." Back on the shuttle, Commander Hayes was listening to everything through Lisa's communication device. He found himself thinking about his own life, his own fears, his own reasons for choosing a dangerous career in space exploration. "She's right," he whispered to himself. "We are afraid. We're afraid all the time, but we do things anyway." Inside the chamber, Lisa was explaining the human relationship with time and mortality. "You try to terrorize species by showing them that everything ends," she said. "But humans have learned to find meaning in endings. We have ceremonies to mark the end of seasons, the end of years, the end of lives. We gather together to remember what was good about things that are gone." She paused, looking directly into Zarthok's burning eyes. "We even have stories about the end of the universe itself. And in those stories, we don't focus on the tragedy of everything ending. We focus on how amazing it is that anything existed at all. We celebrate the temporary miracle of consciousness arising from cosmic dust." The Vorthak were completely silent now, struggling to understand how any species could have developed such a radically different relationship with existential terror. "There's something else," Lisa continued. "Humans don't just accept these fears individually. We share them. We created art and music and literature specifically to help each other cope with the knowledge of mortality and meaninglessness. She gestured around the chamber. You use fear to isolate beings, to make them feel alone with their terror. But humans learn to use fear to connect with each other. When someone is afraid, we don't abandon them. We say, "I'm afraid too," and that's okay. Zarthok's voice was barely audible now. But how do you bear it? How do you carry such weight without being crushed? We don't carry it alone, Lisa said simply. We share the load. When one person feels overwhelmed by the meaninglessness of existence, others remind them of the meaning they've created together. When someone is afraid of death, others help them focus on the life they still have. She walked closer to the alien leader, who no longer seemed threatening despite her terrifying appearance. You see, the Vorthak made a fundamental error in understanding. You assumed that beings would be destroyed by existential truth, but humans discovered that sharing existential truth makes it bearable. We built entire civilizations on the foundation of life is hard and scary and brief, so let's help each other through it. The chamber felt different now. The oppressive atmosphere of fear and dominance had been replaced by something else. The Vorthak were no longer the predators in this encounter. They were confused, frightened beings who had just discovered that their entire worldview was incomplete. "Why aren't you afraid, human?" Zarthok asked one final time, her voice now small and vulnerable. Lisa's answer would echo through Vorthak society for generations to come. "Because I've been afraid my whole life. I'm afraid every single day. I'm afraid right now. The difference is, I've learned that being afraid doesn't mean you have to stop living. It doesn't mean you have to stop loving. It doesn't mean you have to stop trying to make things better." She paused, then added the words that would change everything. "Fear isn't the enemy of life. Fear is just part of life. And life, even a fearful life, is better than no life at all." The silence in the chamber stretched for long minutes. Zarthok and her fellow Vorthak stood frozen, not by their own fear projection abilities, but by the crushing realization that everything they thought they knew about psychology, survival, and consciousness was wrong. Lisa waited patiently, watching as the alien leader struggled with concepts that challenged the very foundation of Vorthak civilization. Finally, Zarthok spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your species has known these truths all along," she said. It wasn't a question. It was the statement of someone whose entire worldview was crumbling. "Not just known them," Lisa replied gently. "We've been teaching them to our children. Every human grows up learning that life is temporary, that the universe is vast and indifferent, that suffering is inevitable, and that death comes to everyone. These aren't revelations that break our minds. They're basic facts we learn alongside reading and mathematics." One of the other Vorthak stepped forward, his multiple eyes dim with confusion. "But how do your young survive such knowledge? How do they not despair?" "Because we also teach them what to do with that knowledge," Lisa explained. "We show them how humans throughout history have faced the same truths and created meaning anyway. We teach them that being small in a big universe doesn't make you unimportant. It makes you unique. It makes every act of kindness, every moment of joy, every connection between beings into something precious." Zarthok sank down to the floor, her massive form suddenly seeming fragile and old. "We have been wrong," she said, her voice filled with something that might have been wonder or horror. "For 3,000 years we have been wrong about everything." "Not wrong," Lisa said, sitting down across from the alien leader. "Just incomplete. You discovered that existential truth could be used as a weapon, but you never learned that it could also be used as a foundation." She looked around at the other Vorthak, who were all staring at her with expressions she couldn't quite read. "Your species has incredible psychic abilities," she continued. "You can project thoughts and emotions directly into other minds, but you've only ever used that power to share fear. What would happen if you tried to share hope instead?" The suggestion hit the Vorthak like another revelation. They had never considered using their abilities for anything other than domination and control. "We don't know how," Zarthok admitted. "Fear is all we understand. Terror is the only emotion we can reliably project." "Maybe that's because it's the only emotion you let yourselves feel," Lisa suggested. "You've spent so much time running away from existential dread that you never learned to sit with it, to transform it into something else." Back on the horizon, Captain Morrison was receiving reports from his crew about the unprecedented nature of what was happening. Never in recorded history had a Vorthak negotiation lasted this long without ending in either surrender or death. "Captain," called Ensign Rogers from communications. "I'm detecting unusual energy patterns from the Vorthak ship. Their fear projection systems appear to be powering down." Dr. Clark looked up from her medical readings. "Lisa's stress levels are still completely normal. If anything, she seems more relaxed now than when she first entered their ship." Inside the alien chamber, Lisa was explaining more about human culture to the fascinated Vorthak. "We have support groups where people gather to share their fears and help each other cope," she said. "We have therapists who specialize in helping people process existential anxiety. We have entire fields of study dedicated to understanding how consciousness deals with mortality. You have made fear into a science," Zarthok observed. "We've made coping with fear into a science," Lisa corrected. "We study resilience, post-traumatic growth, meaning-making in the face of trauma. We've learned that the same experiences that break some people can make others stronger, and we try to understand why." She stood up and walked over to the holographic displays that showed the terrified faces of conquered species. "These beings weren't weak," she said, looking at the frozen expressions of terror. "They were just unprepared. They lived their whole lives believing in cosmic significance. So when you showed them cosmic insignificance, they had no framework for processing it. And humans have that framework," Zarthok said, understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. "We've had it for millennia. We've been practicing for this conversation since the first human looked up at the stars and wondered what happens when we die." Lisa turned back to face the Vorthak leader. "The truth is, your species and mine aren't that different. You're afraid too. You're afraid of the same things you use to terrorize others. The only difference is that humans learn to live with that fear, while the Vorthak learned to project it outward." The alien leader's breathing became irregular. For the first time in her existence, Zarthok was experiencing the full weight of existential dread, without any way to escape it or push it onto someone else. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice small and lost. "Now you have a choice," Lisa said. "You can keep running from these fears by projecting them onto others, or you can learn to do what humans did. You can learn to carry them without being crushed, to find meaning despite meaninglessness, to create purpose in a purposeless universe." She walked over to the chamber's control panel. "But first you're going to release the colonists from the Endeavor, because now you understand that terrorizing innocent people won't make your own fears go away." Zarthok nodded slowly. With a gesture, she activated the ship's communication system. "Release the humans," she ordered her crew. "All of them, unharmed." "Thank you," Lisa said simply. As she prepared to leave, Zarthok called out to her one last time. "Human Lisa, your species has given us much to think about. Perhaps we could learn from each other. Perhaps there are other ways to use our abilities." Lisa smiled. "I think that would be good for both our species. Fear shared is fear multiplied, but understanding shared is understanding multiplied too." As she walked back toward the shuttle bay, Lisa reflected on what had just happened. The Vorthak hadn't been defeated by superior weapons or technology. They had been transformed by a simple truth: that the things they feared most were the same things humans had been learning to live with for thousands of years. Commander Hayes greeted her at the shuttle with obvious relief. "How did you do it?" he asked as they flew back to the horizon. "I didn't do anything special," Lisa replied, looking out at the stars. "I just told them what every human learns eventually. Life is scary and difficult and temporary, and that's exactly why it's worth living." The Vorthak ship began to move away, but not in pursuit or threat. It was the slow, thoughtful movement of beings who had much to consider. Behind them, the colony ship Endeavor was already sending messages of gratitude and relief. 50,000 lives had been saved not by force, but by the simple human understanding that fear is not the enemy of life. It's just part of the journey. And sometimes, that journey is more beautiful because of the darkness, not despite it. In the vast cosmos, humans continued their strange voyage. Small, mortal, frightened beings who had somehow learned to dance with infinity instead of running from it. And now, perhaps they wouldn't be dancing alone.